welcome to those of you who are here with us live, and also to those of you who are joining us on Facebook. It's a blessing to be able to share the ministry of the Word with you. I'd like to start out this morning with a story about my kids. And if you're a preacher's kid, your whole life becomes fodder for sermons. But they're pretty good sports about it. It's a story that some of you may have heard before, but I know some of you haven't. And I think it serves as a lead-in to what we're going to be talking about today. Anybody remember Power Wheels? Power wheels, power wheels, power wheels. Now I'm driving for real. Well, anyway, my mom and dad bought one of those for the grandkids. And when Simeon and Abby were 4 or 5, something like that. Abe wasn't old enough to drive it yet. But when they had this, my mom and dad have a big stretch of land, and of course that's just like having this wilderness to wander in the Jeep, for the kiddos driving this Power Wheels thing. And of course, Simeon's a car guy, always has been since he was tiny. And so the general pattern was taking turns being the driver or the passenger in this Power Wheels. But we were all, of course, we adults would go out and watch and enjoy. And we would stand around the barn and watch them do their thing. And they came back, and for some reason, Simeon really wanted Abby to take her turn driving. And Abby just didn't really care a whole lot about it. She would drive it, but it wasn't like her big thing. She was content just to sit and have fun, watching Simeon drive. And normally Simeon would like the option to not give up the wheel, but for some reason he had it in his head that Abby needed to drive, really wanted to drive. And finally, it is over and over, Abby, you need to drive, Abby, you need to drive. So finally she's like, okay. And so she takes her turn, and she takes off on this little thing, and she keeps, like probably every 10 seconds or so, she's driving, then she would put the wheel, they'd turn the wheel, and the wheel would go off the concrete into this river rock gravel, and it would get stuck, and Simeon would have to hop out and try to lift it up and get it back in place, and some of us adults would help. And then she would basically run into various different things, getting it stuck. And she finally, the last time, it was in front of us adults, and she got it stuck, and Simeon's like, scoot over, Abby, I'm driving. and Abby puts her elbow out the side of the car. She leans and looks at us adults, and she goes, that's what I thoughted. She had a plan. She didn't want to drive. And so even her turn driving was just a transition into her getting back to not driving, and she was going to make this goal happen for herself. Well, we're going to talk about bigger goals in a bigger context. She had her context of sitting in the car and taking in the land, and she interpreted her present in light of that goal. Well, obviously, we as Christians are called to we're called to a higher calling. We are called to place our short lives in the context of the great story that God is giving. And of course, we have the eternal life that we're looking forward to, but there is something that God is doing in the current stage, where we are born, and we are living this life, and we are passing away, and passing on the faith to the coming generations. And so for each of us, there is this choice, whether we're going to focus on this short life, and we're grasping at various pleasures and just the transient passing things, or are we going to look at our lives and view it in light of what God is doing, and realizing our lives, in one sense, yes, they're a vapor, they're transient, but actually they're fuller than that. They are transitional. And everything that we are doing is leading to what is to come. So we can bring up that cover slide. Title for the sermon is Transient or Transitional? Reflections on a Short Life in a Long Story. Anybody recognize that dude? Facebook is a dangerous place. Those publicly available photos. I wasn't alive for at least the first 2 of those. I may have been alive for that one, and finally, I'm alive for this one. Well, I've known John now for 13 years, and I think when it comes to this idea of looking at a life, and if I've done my math correctly, I think he's the oldest here in our congregation. And so if we're talking about our life, he's the one who's had the most memories to produce. And, when he preaches, a lot of these stories come up. And because he has chosen to live his life in the way that he has, these stories come up, and he's able to tell us. He's able to give us advice and memories and these sorts of things. His life has become, each of these stories is transitioning into the next thing to come. His life has been invested, for instance, in ministering in this church and helping to raise up our children in the faith, raise us up in the faith. He has seen his life as transitional. So that's why I put him up here. I think it's an example of, this same kid, that ornery smile, is the same over here. And God has been using him and shaping him all through this. These are passing moments in a short story, but they are also transitional moments in a beautiful story that God is telling. So, in homiletics class, or preaching class, for those that don't know that word, homiletics class, they tell you, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. So, I've told you what I'm going to tell you. Now I'm going to tell you. Let's get to the Bible. We're going to go to 2 Kings chapter 2. Back before I did my sermon series on John, I had taken up the project of working us through the life of Elijah and Elisha, lives of Elijah and Elisha. And I got through Elijah, and then we took the break. Well, I'm heading back into Elisha. And we ended with the catching up of Elijah to heaven. That's been a long time. So I would like to read through that portion of Scripture. That's not what we're going to preach on today, but I'd like to deal with this transitional period, introducing then the life of Elisha. So, going to chapter 2 of 2 Kings, verse 1. Now, when the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven by a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha were on their way from Gilgal. And Elijah said to Elisha, "Please stay here, for the Lord has sent me as far as Bethel." But Elisha said, "As the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So they went down to Bethel. And the sons of the prophets who were in Bethel came out to Elisha and said to him, "Do you know that today the Lord will take away your master from over you?" And he said, "Yes, I know. Keep quiet." Elijah said to him, "Elisha, please stay here, for the Lord has sent me to Jericho." But he said, "As the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So they came to Jericho. The sons of the prophets who were at Jericho drew near to Elisha and said to him, "Do you know that today the Lord will take away your master from over you?" And he answered, "Yes, I know. Keep quiet." Then Elijah said to him, "Please stay here, for the Lord has sent me to the Jordan." But he said, "As the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So the two of them went on. 50 men of the sons of the prophets also went, and stood at some distance from them, as they both were standing by the Jordan. Then Elijah took his cloak, rolled it up, and struck the water. And the water was parted to the one side and to the other, till the two of them could go over on dry ground. Does that ring a bell for anybody? Crossing the Jordan on dry ground. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, "Ask what I shall do for you before I am taken from you." And Elisha said, "Please let there be a double portion of your spirit on me." Now, just a clarification, when I was a kid, I thought, man, it's a big ask. He's wanting to be like twice as good as Elijah. Probably what he's referring to is the process of inheritance. If you had 4 kids, you would split your property 5 ways, and you'd give a double portion to the firstborn. And the firstborn had that double portion, but he also became the paterfamilias, the head over the family. And so there was additional responsibility for that role. So really, it seems more likely to be that Elisha is asking to be his successor. And he said, "You have asked a hard thing. Yet, if you see me as I am being taken from you, it shall be so for you. But if you do not see me, it shall not be so." And as they still went on and talked, behold, chariots of fire and horses of fire separated the two of them. And Elijah went up by a whirlwind into heaven. And Elisha saw it, and he cried, my father, the chariots of Israel and its horsemen." And he saw him no more. And of course, the question is, what does he mean by this, the chariots of Israel and its horsemen? And I think to me, it's this close relationship of the two of them ministering together. How many amazing things had they experienced together? And sometimes you just see something amazing or something special, and you're just, hey, look at what's happening. I had a memory of my niece was once in the grocery store with her mom, and she saw a life-size cutout of Donkey from Shrek and Donkey. And she was raised in a church environment where she heard the King James Bible a lot, and the Christmas story told in King James terminology. And she starts yelling in the grocery store, Mommy, an ass, Mommy, it's an ass. And her mom's like, And so I think when we see Elisha observing this wonderful, beautiful, glorious mystery, it's just like, my father, the chariots and horses of Israel. It's like this last adventure, and it's like he's shouting up to Elijah in the sky. Don't know for sure, but that's the mood that I get here, this close relationship and this wonder at what he has just experienced. And I want us to catch that moment and keep that in our heads, because for the rest of this account, when Elisha is having these adventures, when he takes off on his own, he's got this glorious display of the wonder of God on his mind. So he comes from this, and he sees him no more. Then he took hold of his own clothes and tore them in two pieces, a sign of mourning. It's brilliant and glorious to see, but obviously he's without Elijah now. And he took up the cloak of Elijah that had fallen from him and went back and stood on the bank of the Jordan. And I love this moment. It's just a brilliant parallelism with the role of Moses and Joshua. If you think back to Joshua, Moses he's not allowed to enter the promised land. And of course, Joshua, when it comes to the banks of the Jordan, getting ready to go in and begin the taking over of the land of Canaan, the Lord specifically frames the miracle that is to come as a way of showing that it's a display that God is with Joshua when he enters into the land. We won't go there for sake of time this morning. But now Elijah, having left his successor behind, is now holding this cloak and standing in front of the Jordan, getting ready to re-enter, to have his own adventure here. Then he took the cloak of Elijah that had fallen from him and struck the water, saying, "Where is the Lord, the God of Elijah?" And when he struck the water was parted to the one side and to the other, and Elisha went over. And another parallelism here, another parallel to the life of Moses and Joshua. Of course, Joshua and the people go over the Jordan, and eventually they end up encountering and conquering Jericho. Well, now we see Elisha crossing over the Jordan, and he's in this time of transition from Elijah to Elisha. Elijah has been caught up. Now, verse 15, he's coming to Jericho. Now, when the sons of the prophets who were at Jericho saw him opposite them, they said, "The spirit of Elijah rests on Elisha." And they came to meet him and bowed to the ground before him. And they said to him, "Behold now, there are with your servants 50 strong men. Please let them go and seek your master. It may be that the Spirit of the Lord has caught him up and cast him upon some mountain or into some valley." Okay, so here it is. They see that the spirit of Elijah rests on Elisha, but they're still not sure of the transition. They're wanting some, I think it's interesting that this is not the only time when people are like, the Lord may have taken him up and cast him somewhere else. This traveling back and forth seems to be something that people have on their minds about Elijah. So yeah, he may have gone up, but maybe God's not done with him yet. So his first inquiring of Elisha in this role. It may be that the Spirit of the Lord has caught him up and cast him upon some mountain or into some valley. And he said, again, this is Elisha coming with the authority of Yahweh, having just crossed the Jordan River on dry ground, and the first thing he tells them is, "You shall not sin." It's like, no, you don't need to check. He's gone. And of course the people are like, yes, he's the prophet. Okay. No, that's not what happened. He said, "You shall not sin." But when they urged him till he was ashamed, sort of bugging him until he says yes, he said, "Send." They sent therefore 50 men, and for 3 days they sought him, but did not find him. And they came back to him while he was staying at Jericho. I think his response is funny. And they came back to him while he was staying at Jericho, and he said to them, "Did I not say to you, do not go?" 50 men out searching for this person for 3 days. You got to wonder how tired they are coming back, and he's just like, "I said so." Now, first main point this morning. Be patient. Sometimes God's servant just has to be faithful, keep speaking the truth, and patiently wait for God's people to catch up. Now, why am I saying this? Again, I want to draw attention to, he's just had this huge experience. No doubt that the Lord is upon him and doing his work. No doubt that Elijah's been taken away. No doubt the transition has happened and he has the authority, and the first opportunity people have to hear what he has to say, they're like, let me check. We liked your boss. We want to make sure that God's not done with him yet. One of the strengths of Living Hope Bible Church that drew us here was the idea of leaving room for discussion in the Christian community. There are fundamentals of the faith that we agree upon, but if you're wrong and you're always with people who are wrong like you, it's very hard to ever get out of that situation of being wrong. But if you're in a group that has the same goals, is worshiping the same God, holds the same central truths together, but then these peripheral ideas, if we're ever going to get clarity on them, we need to be together and we need to be able to discuss. Now, Elisha knew he was right. When we get together and John and I disagree on something, it's not like I'm sitting here with my Bible and being like, well, Jesus and Paul agree with me. I'm just waiting for John to catch up. Or John doesn't feel that way about me. But we do have differences of opinion within the congregation, individual passages, what they mean, and how, and sometimes even with direction of what we should do. We get together and we take counsel about what God wants us to do in certain situations, and we dig through the scriptures trying to come to the truth. But if we are right, we do have this figured out. Sometimes, like Elisha, you're going to have the right idea. You're going to, I've had to make transitions sometimes in my theology, be like, that guy had it right, I had it wrong. I had to catch up to this person who understood the scriptures better than I did. And it's a lot easier to do that when the person who does understand better is approaching you kindly and is making room for you and is being patient with you. So I appreciate Elisha being patient while these, and it's interesting, it's the sons of the prophets. I mean, it's not people that don't know anything. It's people that are above the cut, above the crowd. Cut above is what I'm trying to say. Cut above the crowd. People who are devoted to the Lord, and they're still not quite sure of what is true yet. But they come around. And I think that's a note of wisdom for us, to be able to be looking at the scriptures, to come to conclusions, study hard, but also to recognize our own fallibility. I'm not the prophet Elisha. I don't have Yahweh speaking directly to me and saying this is what's going to happen. That's not in my daily experience. But we do have the scriptures, and sometimes we'll see something that seems very plain. But it's good for us to remember that we are down this stream of church history and need to recognize that and then make room for discussion, for the Holy Spirit to move in our midst. So moving on from that, so I'll repeat that point again. Be patient. Sometimes God's servant just has to be faithful. Keep speaking the truth and patiently wait for God's people to catch up. And I would say sometimes you're the person that needs to catch up. Sometimes I'm the person that needs to catch up. Now he's in Jericho. Now the men of the city said to Elisha, "Behold, the situation of this city is pleasant, as my Lord sees, but the water is bad, and the land is unfruitful." He said, "Bring me a new bowl and put salt in it." So they brought it to him. Then he went to the spring of water and threw salt in it, and said, "Thus says the Lord, I have healed this water. From now on, neither death nor miscarriage shall come from it." So the water has been healed to this day, according to the word that Elisha spoke. So, are we to take from this that if you've got bad water, put some salt in it? Is that the application of this Bible passage? Well, yeah, obviously that's not it. Jesus also put mud in the eyes of the blind man. But if I do that, they tell me, "Sir, you're not allowed to come back to this Walmart again." It doesn't work. Obviously, this is some sort of object lesson for them. The scriptures don't nail this down, but salt is thought of as a preservative. It's also, nice for seasoning, this sort of thing. But he is making this kind of physical motion. But then Yahweh is, of course, healing the water of Jericho. Now, I want to remind us of Jericho. Obviously, every kid that's been through a Sunday school class knows that Jericho gets demolished, it's flattened when Israel came into the land. Remember, we're in this time period of the divided kingdom now. Israel has split from Judah, and things have gone badly. And I want to introduce here some of how this has gone badly, but we'll get into a little bit of that later. We want to go back to Joshua chapter 6, discussing the fall of Jericho. Verse 26, after Jericho has been destroyed. Verse 26, Joshua laid an oath on them at that time, saying, "Cursed before the Lord be the man who rises up and rebuilds this city, Jericho. At the cost of his firstborn shall he lay its foundation, and at the cost of his youngest son shall he set up its gates." So the Lord was with Joshua, and his fame was in all the land. Then I want to go over to 1 Kings chapter 16. And I'm going to go back to verse 29. Remember that Israel has fallen into extreme disobedience. In the 38th year of Asa, king of Judah, Ahab the son of Omri began to reign over Israel. And Ahab the son of Omri reigned over Israel in Samaria 22 years. And Ahab the son of Omri did evil in the sight of the Lord, more than all who were before him. And as if it had been a light thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, he took for his wife Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians, and went and served Baal and worshipped him. He erected an altar for Baal in the house of Baal, which he built in Samaria. And Ahab made an Asherah. Ahab did more to provoke the Lord, the God of Israel, to anger than all the kings of Israel who were before him. In his days, Hiel of Bethel built Jericho. He laid its foundation at the cost of Abiram his firstborn, and set up its gates at the cost of his youngest son Segub, according to the word of the Lord, which he spoke by Joshua the son of Nun. Remember that when they came into the promised land, it wasn't just God saying, I prefer this people group over this people group. They were coming to a land of false religion, which is so far into the bizarre and evil that human sacrifice was something that they would do, offering up their children. It was a terrible place, and God was bringing Israel into the land, yes, to give them the land, but also to be divine punishment upon the wickedness of the land. Israel was meant to be this different nation, a city on the hill. People from other nations were meant to look at Israel and to be drawn to the God of Israel. But instead, Israel had fallen into cycles of disobedience. And again, like I said before, they're now in this situation of a divided kingdom, the north and the south. And so when he comes to Jericho, again, initially, when Joshua crossed the Jordan and came to Jericho, it's conquering, it's destruction, it's a curse of the Lord. Don't rebuild this city. If you do, it will be at the cost of your firstborn. And we see that when they go ahead and they do rebuild it, this prophecy is fulfilled. So when we come back then to 2 Kings, I hope you can see the contrast here. That here's a city that if people had been obedient, the city wouldn't exist. It would be this waste, and it would be a memorial to God's judgment upon the sin of the region. But instead, it has been rebuilt, and people are living there. But yet, here Elisha comes back, and this initial miracle, besides the crossing of the Jordan there, is of purifying the water so that this place is able to live, that they were able to live here and have sustenance without fear of death or miscarriage coming from the water. So point number 2 is this: be ready. The same God who brings judgment at one point is also the one who makes peace. This is not injustice, but rather the reality in a story that is larger than we are. We must be ready to serve in either capacity. To be a faithful Israelite in the time of Joshua was to go to war, was to be involved in bloodshed, to be the agent of God's justice against the people of the land. But now, Elisha coming and crossing the Jordan is coming to these people that themselves are disobedient and that in the end will be conquered because of them falling into the sins of the people around them. They end up being conquered by Assyria. But at this point, in the midst of the story, God is offering them peace. He is giving them good things from the hand of the Lord. So Elisha is finding himself in this complicated situation of a city that shouldn't be there, had people have been obedient, but God is still providing good things for them. Now, I bring this up because life is complicated. I had a young student, teenager, come to me early on in my ministry, and he wanted a weekly discipleship, some one-on-one teaching and that sort of thing. And he had been enough into the faith to understand. He was dealing with, as a lot of teenagers do, questions about sexuality and what's appropriate and what's not, what's God's plan for that. And in processing that, hey, the sexual relationship is for a husband and wife. This is what the scriptures teach, and anything outside of that is forbidden. Well, he said, I'm having trouble thinking through this because I'm an illegitimate child. My mom and dad were not married when I was conceived. He says, if they had been obedient, I'd never exist. So what do I do with that? And I don't remember my exact words, but the gist of what I directed him to was to think back. Adam and Eve sinned. And from since then, we've all been, throughout history, it's been cycle and cycle and cycle of sin and disobedience. And God is constantly bringing good things out of sinful situations. If God was not going to interact with sinners, if he was not going to reach down and be involved in bringing good things out of sin, then he wouldn't be involved at all. So I said, yes, your mother and your father were in sin whenever they were in this sexual relationship outside of marriage. But your conception in that act was a good act of God. It's an act of life. He brought about you, and you are now this faithful believer. And your mother, his parents didn't end up together, and he was raised in a home with his stepfather. At that, his mother was there, had become a believer, and had brought him into the church fellowship. He had become a believer and was seriously pursuing Christ. And then his stepfather eventually became a believer as well. So much good was worked there. So God is able to take sinful situations, such as the existence of Jericho, and he's not done. He's continuing to work. He's continuing to put his grace and his mercy into this situation. So I said, yes, what happened in the timeline was sin. But God brought about good, your conception, from the midst of that sin. So we need to be able to look out at the complications of life and understand that the situation is what it is. We can look at these situations and say, well, if I could go back in time, we could change this. Well, yeah, go back and prevent Hitler. Well, I mean, how many relationships came out of World War II? You see what I'm saying? If we could invent time travel, I think we'd all go, no, don't. You change something in my past and Simeon doesn't exist. You change something in my past and Abe goes away. The storyline belongs to God. He's in charge of it. And whatever we have worked into that story, even the evil that we have worked into the story, was not foreseen, or it was not unforeseen. It was foreseen. And God has always been working with us in the state in which we are to bring about his goodness, to bring about his good plan. Somebody once said God is able to draw a straight line with a crooked stick. God is bringing about redemption in the midst of our sin. So here we have Jericho is being shown mercy, whereas in a perfect world, in the timeline that maybe we would create, if everybody would do what they were supposed to, it shouldn't have existed. But it does. And God continues to work in the midst of this situation through Elisha. So, again, be ready. The same God who brings judgment at one point is also the one who makes peace. This is not injustice, but rather the reality in a story that is larger than we are. We must be ready to serve in either capacity. And I would also say, going back to our title, these things are transient. The sin, for instance, of this one child's parents, it's in the past. And it was transitional into what God had for them in the future with their conversion and the raising of their son in the faith. So we've left Jericho. In verse 22, so the water has been healed to this day, according to the word that Elisha spoke. Now, this next one's a humdinger of a passage, 23 through 25. He went up from there to Bethel, and while he was going up on the way, some small boys came out of the city and jeered at him, saying, "Go up, you bald head! Go up, you bald head!" And he turned around, and when he saw them, he cursed them in the name of the Lord. And 2 she-bears came out of the woods and tore 42 of the boys. From there, he went on to Mount Carmel, and from there, he returned to Samaria. Third point, be careful. Watch what you say about bald-headed preachers. And please put up the next slide. That is not the point that I'm going to make with this passage. Now, remember, we're reading this in English, and there are different views. Obviously, the translators of the ESV do think this is about Elijah calling down curses upon little boys coming out of the city to jeer at him. But I will say there is debate about exactly how to translate this passage. Primarily because the words that are used in describing them, for instance, as small boys, it's Narim Katanim. And then later on, when it calls them boys in verse 24, it's Yeladim. And these words are used in various contexts of, we have words that have broad meanings. If I say young man, I could call both Abe and Aaron young men. But Aaron's a 20-something and is employed and well into his adult life, and Abe is just getting ready to turn 18 on the 14th. I could describe them both as young men. Well, same sort of situation happens with the words in this passage. You will find these words used to describe these people who come out after Elisha, and you can use they are used of soldiers in battle, used of servants, used of King Solomon describes himself as this once he's already king. Now some would say he's saying, I'm just a little boy, being a bit hyperbolic in what he's saying. But we do have these words used of adults, and specifically here with the idea of the small, the word for small there, that word in Hebrew has a lot of leeway. It can mean small, it can mean young, it can mean insignificant. And I'll put forth a little. There's some scholars point out there's an issue back earlier in the chapter when Elisha and Elijah go down to Bethel. We think of down, we might think of south, that sort of thing, but that's not how they use that terminology in the Hebrew. If you're talking about up and down, when they're talking about directions in Hebrew, they're generally talking about elevation. And so you'll look in the scholarly literature and they're like, wait a second. Well, if you go from Gilgal to Bethel, that's going up. Why does he say it's going down? And so they'll say, well, maybe there's another Gilgal that we don't know about, and then they'll make suggestions about where it could be geographically. But some scholars look at this and say they think that the writer is being subtle in talking about what's going on at Bethel. And we're going to talk about what's going on at Bethel. But Bethel had become a place of false worship, and I'll go and read about that in a minute. And the idea of going up to some place, remember we had the high places, people worshiping false gods on high places in the land, big problem in the Old Testament. And this idea of going up to worship, we have the Psalms of Ascent in the book of Psalms, the people traveling up to Jerusalem to worship. This idea of going up can have the idea that you're going to worship. So some would say when they said they went down to Bethel, it's sort of like they were slumming it in Bethel, rather than give honor to this false worship system. They're saying probably it might be that the writer is putting in a subtle dig there at false worship in Israel, saying, yeah, they went down to Bethel. And so they're saying if the writer means that up in that passage, whenever he calls these young men small, it could be talking about their age, and you could be maybe like Abe would be, I guess we just lost the mic there. Abe would be the small young man. Aaron would be the larger young man in the sense of age. But some would say the last time they were in Bethel, when Elijah and Elisha came by, it was the sons of the prophets that came out to meet them. Now Elisha is going to Bethel, and he is met by this crowd that is against Yahweh and is openly mocking of him. So it may be that by calling them small, he's pointing out their insignificance in comparison to the sons of the prophets. So all that to say, in my view, what we're dealing with is not going back to the idea of 5-year-old Simeon and coming out and calling somebody bald and God bringing down wrath upon them. We're probably looking at young men on the younger side who are responsible for their actions. And we're looking at the downfall of worship in the city of Bethel. Thank you, sir. Can you hear me now? And I'll turn it off and back on again. Hello. Anything? No? Oh, there we go. All right. Bald preacher's ready to talk again. So, in my view, when we're approaching this passage, my wife and I like to watch British television. I'm imagining more a situation where the local vicar turns a corner and he's got a whole big street full of street toughs ready to give him what for. Is the situation that in my mind we're looking at here. But I want to go back. We talked a bit about the history of Jericho. Jericho is this place with a bad history, a cursed history, that God brings good to it. Well, here I want to go back to Genesis 28, going way back. And talk about Jacob's dream. Jacob left Beersheba and went toward Haran, and he came to a certain place and stayed there that night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place to sleep. And he dreamed, and behold, there was a ladder set up on the earth, or a stairway, and the top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and to your offspring. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west, and to the east, and to the north, and to the south. And in you and your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Behold, I am with you, and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. And he was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God, Beth Elohim in Hebrew. And this is the gate of heaven. So early in the morning, Jacob took the stone that he had put under his head and set it up for a pillar and poured oil on the top of it. He called the name of that place Bethel, or in Hebrew it's Beth El, the shortened form of Elohim, God, Beth El. But the name of the city was Luz at the first. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, if God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God. And this stone which I have set up for a pillar shall be God's house. And all that you give me, I will give a full tenth to you. So we're going to go to Genesis 35 next. This is a major place in the history of Israel. Jacob has, through trickery, gotten the blessing stolen the blessing from Esau in a sense. And Esau's mad, threatening murder, and he's running for his life. And he's leaving. And God has promised his presence with him, has reiterated the promises that have come before him through his forefathers. And this is a huge event for Jacob. And in Genesis 35, verse 1, God said to Jacob, he's on his way back now, successful. God has blessed him. And he's coming back. God said to Jacob, arise, go up to Bethel and dwell there. Make an altar there to the God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau. So Jacob said to his household and to all who were with him, put away the foreign gods that are among you, and purify yourselves, and change your garments. Then let us arise and go up to Bethel, so that I may make there an altar to the God who answers me in the day of my distress, and has been with me wherever I have gone. So they gave to Jacob all the foreign gods that they had, and the rings that were in their ears. Jacob hid them under the terebinth tree that was near Shechem. I'm going to go on down to verse 9. God appeared to Jacob again when he came from Paddan-aram and blessed him. And God said to him, your name is Jacob. No longer shall your name be Jacob, but Israel shall be your name. Remember, he wrestles with God, had that interaction there with God. That's said before, but it's being reiterated here. So he called his name Israel. And God said to him, I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall come from you, and kings shall come from your own body. The land that I gave to Abraham and Isaac I will give to you, and I will give the land to your offspring after you. Then God went up from him in the place where he had spoken with him. And Jacob set up a pillar in the place where he had spoken with him, a pillar of stone. He poured out a drink offering on it and poured oil on it. So Jacob called the name of the place where God had spoken with him, Bethel. What a beautiful legacy of promise. These people in Bethel, their heritage was to look back on this place, to live there and say, God was faithful to our forefather Jacob here. Jacob had his people put away their false gods. And Jacob is following this God who is fulfilling his promises, even though Jacob himself has been a man of deceit. God has blessed him. God has shown him grace and mercy and faithfulness to his promises. This is what a place to live in, and what an opportunity for to glorify God with the lives they live in this place. But I want to go to 1 Kings 12:25. I am actually going to end sometime today. Now remember, the kingdom of Israel split. Rehoboam made some bad choices, and the kingdom ends up splitting, the north and the south. And Jeroboam, the king in the north, has an opportunity to serve Yahweh faithfully, but that's not the route that he takes. Then Jeroboam built Shechem in the hill country of Ephraim and lived there. And he went out from there and built Penuel. And Jeroboam said in his heart, now the kingdom will turn back to the house of David. If this people go to offer sacrifices in the temple of the Lord at Jerusalem, then the heart of this people would turn again to their Lord, to Rehoboam, king of Judah, and they will kill me and return to Rehoboam, king of Judah. So the king took counsel and made 2 calves of gold. And he said to the people, you have gone up to Jerusalem long enough. Behold your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. And he set one in Bethel, and the other he put in Dan. Then this thing became a sin, for the people went as far as Dan to be before one. He also made temples on high places and appointed priests from among all the people who were not of the Levites. And Jeroboam appointed a feast on the 15th day of the 8th month, like the feast that was in Judah. And he offered sacrifices on the altar. So he did in Bethel, sacrificing to the calves that he made. And he placed in Bethel the priests of the high places that he had made. He went up to the altar that he had made in Bethel on the 15th day in the 8th month, in the month that he had devised from his own heart. And he instituted a feast for the people of Israel and went up to the altar to make offerings. I want to go to the far side of history here, the nation of Israel, in 2 Kings 17. And then we'll go back to our text for today. Summing up the history of Israel, verse 14, but they would not listen, but were stubborn as their fathers had been, who did not believe in the Lord their God. They despised his statutes and his covenant that he made with their fathers and the warnings that he gave them. They went after false idols and became false. And they followed the nations that were around them, concerning whom the Lord had commanded them that they should not do like them. And they abandoned all the commandments of the Lord their God and made for themselves metal images of 2 calves. And they made an Asherah and worshipped all the host of heaven and served Baal. And they burned their sons and their daughters as offerings and used divination and omens and sold themselves to do evil in the sight of the Lord, provoking him to anger. Therefore the Lord was very angry with Israel and removed them out of his sight. None was left but the tribe of Judah only. And so we see this northern nation of Israel becoming exactly like the people that their forefathers had been the instrument of God punishing them for cleansing the land of this evil, these false ways of worship, of manipulating the gods to get your physical life to go how you want, of offering your sons and daughters up as burnt offerings to these evil false gods. And rather than being this city on a hill, they just let themselves be dragged down. They got obsessed with the people around them and just followed the ways of the evil ones around them. Rather than being a city on a hill, rather than representing Yahweh and his love, they ended up falling into darkness and evil. So the fall was very great. So going back then to 2 Kings chapter 2, this is the history of Bethel. And if this is what Bethel has become, this place of false worship, of worship specifically in distinction to Yahweh, when we look at this event where Elisha he curses them in the name of the Lord, and 2 she-bears came out of the woods and tore 42 of the boys. I think it's important here. If 2 she-bears come out at a crowd, what's most of the crowd going to do? They're going to run. They're going to bolt. They're going to try to, 2 she-bears are not normally going to be able to get everybody in the crowd. So if the she-bears are able to tear 42 of these people who have come after Elisha with their mockery, that means the crowd was a whole lot larger, I would think, statistically. So when Elisha comes out, this is a major event. And also, I think this is a little bit of a tip of there's probably not 100 little boys coming outside the city to insult the prophet. This is a mob that is purposely coming out and insulting this man of God. And this go up you bald head, go up you bald head. We don't know for sure what they're meaning here, but obviously the bald head idea is an insulting thing to say. And some have thought maybe it has to do with the specific haircut the priests would wear or whatever. We don't really have clear evidence on that, but it's, often baldness is looked at. Well, let's just say it's not popular. Most of us as teenagers didn't look in the mirror and be like, man, I can't wait till this falls out. But luckily for me, Jenna Ray said she had a crush on Mr. Clean, whichever she was a little girl. So I'm the man of her dreams, is what we're trying to say. But they are insulting him, and this go up idea. It could be we talk about this idea of going up to worship. Bethel is this place of worship of this golden calf. It could be that they're like, yeah, you come worship this way. This is how we worship here, Southern boy. You person who wants to worship Yahweh. Or it could be that the story of Elijah being caught up to heaven has reached them. And rather than responding in wonder and submission, they're saying, yeah, you get out of here too. Go on up, Baldy. Get out of here. I don't want you. Bethel has turned from a place that could have the opportunity to have this rich heritage and history that they could celebrate and give honor and glory to Yahweh. But instead, it has become this place where when the prophet passes by, they're all this whole group is coming out to insult him. And I think it's interesting that Elisha. We don't want to imagine this. If you tell the way of the small boys, it sounds a whole lot like Anakin and the younglings. Star Wars reference there. It's not. But I think it's interesting what Elisha does. He doesn't whip out his prophet lightsaber and kill everybody. What he does is he curses them in the name of the Lord. He's a prophet and he is speaking from Yahweh, and he is handing it over to Yahweh's determination. So Elisha doesn't do this to these people. He is the mouthpiece for Yahweh, and Yahweh does this to this people. And so in this place of false worship, of worshiping of a golden calf, in the place of Yahweh, in a place where Yahweh should be honored and his covenant faithfulness being celebrated, think about how upside down this picture is. And these people are turning into this false worship system of manipulating the gods to get what they want in the here and now. Well, God is basically showing them the insignificance of their gods, the weakness of this system of worship. It's like, okay, nature turns around and brings death to this group of people who are trusting in the God in a false picture of God, rather than trusting the one true God. It's that they were meant to come in and purge the land of impurity and meant to live a life to draw others to Yahweh, but instead the land is in a sense chewing them up and spitting them out through these bears. So, yes, my main point was not watch what you say about bald-headed preachers, but instead, third point, last point, be careful. Past history and established reputation do not determine the future. The lives we live today are continually shaping the thoughts and loyalties of the generations to follow. I'll read that again. Be careful. Past history and established reputation do not determine the future. The lives we live today are continually shaping the thoughts and loyalties of the generations to follow. Your life and your day-to-day are not insignificant. The generation to follow is shaped by us. Our lives are in the midst of this story that God is telling, and we have the privilege of people that are called out and have the light of Jesus Christ. We have the Holy Spirit living within us, and we have this opportunity to go out and represent Him. But we also have the opportunity to be caught up in the transient, caught up in the everyday, and let ourselves, little by little, just become like the culture around us, and we can become turned around and be something completely different than what we were called to. There was a Sarah Grove song we used to listen to a lot whenever the kids were, about the age of my opening story. And it says, "Remind me of this with every decision. Generations will reap what I sow. I can pass on a curse or a blessing to those I may never know." What we do and what we say today, should the Lord not return before then, we've got centuries that we are shaping right here in this room. Remember the context of the story. So I'll repeat these main points and we'll close up. So, transient or transitional, reflections on a short life and a long story. 1, be patient. Sometimes God's servant just has to be faithful. Keep speaking the truth and patiently wait for God's people to catch up. Number 2, be ready. The same God who brings judgment at one point is also the one who makes peace. This is not injustice, but rather the reality in a story that is larger than we are. We must be ready to serve in either capacity. And lastly, be careful. Past history and established reputation do not determine the future. The lives we live today are continually shaping the thoughts and loyalties of the generations to follow. Our past is what our past is. We can't change the story that has happened to this point. But God has called us to be sub-creators under Him. He has invited us to participate in writing the story that is to follow. We are called to shape this world. So let us follow follow our calling. God our Father, we ask that you would help us to see our lives in the light of your word, in the light of the story that you are telling.